Every civilization that has ever existed has left behind at least one story about a place that vanished. A city, swallowed by water, buried by sand, consumed by its own ambition. For a long time, historians treated these stories the way adults treat childhood dreams, as something emotionally resonant, but ultimately not worth following into the ground with a shovel. Then archaeology started following them anyway. And some of those shovels hit stone. Not always the stone of the legend itself, but stone that suggested the legend wasn't invented from nothing, that somewhere underneath the mythology was a memory, a real place, a real collapse, a real city that people once walked through and then, for reasons still being untangled, stopped walking through forever. These are 5 of those cities, not confirmed, not debunked, somewhere in the space between story and excavation, where the most interesting historical questions tend to live. Start with the one everyone knows the name of and almost no one knows the actual evidence for: Atlantis. The name alone carries so much cultural weight that serious researchers often avoid it entirely, not wanting their work associated with the wilder theories that orbit the subject. But strip away the pyramids built by Atlanteans nonsense. Strip away the pseudo-archaeology, and go back to the original source, and what you find is more interesting than the mythology that replaced it. Plato introduced Atlantis in 2 dialogues, written around 360 BCE, Timaeus and Critias. He described it as a powerful naval civilization, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, that was destroyed in a single day and night by catastrophic flooding, roughly 9,000 years before his own time. For most of history, scholars read this as philosophical allegory, a morality tale about hubris, dressed in geographic clothing. And that may well be what it is. Plato was a philosopher, not a historian, and he had clear ideological reasons to construct a cautionary civilization. But a minority of researchers, serious ones, with institutional affiliations and peer-reviewed publications, have pointed to something worth examining. The Mediterranean basin, during the period Plato describes, was geologically active in ways that could have destroyed coastal settlements. The island of Santorini, ancient Thera, experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history around 1600 BCE. The resulting tsunamis and ash fall devastated civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean, including Minoan Crete, a sophisticated naval culture that abruptly declined around the same period. Is Santorini Atlantis? Probably not literally. But could Plato's account be a philosophically embellished version of a real catastrophe, preserved through centuries of oral tradition before he wrote it down? That question is genuinely open. The geological events happened, the civilizations collapsed. The memory, in some form, survived. What Plato did with that memory is what remains uncertain. Cross into the Middle East now, to a city whose existence was considered mythological for centuries, until a British archaeologist named Leonard Woolley started digging in southern Iraq in the 1920s and found it. The city mentioned in the book of Genesis as the birthplace of Abraham. For most of biblical history's scholarly life, Ur was treated as a theological symbol rather than a physical place. Then Woolley's excavations at Tel el-Mukhayr revealed one of the most remarkable ancient sites ever uncovered. A Sumerian city dating back over 6,000 years, complete with a massive ziggurat, royal tombs filled with gold, a sophisticated drainage system, and evidence of trade connections stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Indus Valley. Ur was real. Completely, undeniably, archaeologically real. But here's where it gets complicated in a way that's more interesting than the simple discovery. Among the artifacts Woolley found was evidence of a massive flood, a thick layer of water-deposited silt, nearly 3 meters deep, sitting between 2 distinct periods of human occupation. Woolley believed he had found evidence of the biblical flood. Most archaeologists today disagree the flood layer appears local, not global, and similar layers exist at other Mesopotamian sites representing different flood events at different times. What the evidence does suggest is that catastrophic flooding was a recurring feature of life in the Mesopotamian river valleys, and that the cultural memory of these floods, compressed and mythologized over centuries, may have seeded not just the biblical account, but the earlier Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, which contains a strikingly similar flood narrative written over 1,000 years before Genesis. You didn't just prove that one legendary city was real. It provided a window into how legend and memory interact, how real catastrophes become mythological narratives, and how those narratives can sometimes, if followed carefully enough, lead back to real places. Stay in the ancient world, but move east. To India, and a city that spent most of the 20th century in an awkward position mentioned in the Mahabharata as a magnificent sunken city, dismissed by Western scholarship as Hindu mythology, and then partially vindicated by underwater archaeology in a way that still hasn't been fully processed by mainstream history. Dwarka. According to Hindu tradition, it was the legendary kingdom of Krishna, a city of extraordinary beauty that sank beneath the sea when Krishna departed the mortal world. For centuries, this was read as sacred narrative, not history. In 1983, the Archaeological Survey of India began underwater excavations in the Gulf of Khambhat, off the coast of modern Dwarka in Gujarat. What they found, in shallow water close to the shore, were stone structures, walls, foundations, a possible jetty that appeared to be the remains of a port city. Carbon dating of wood samples from the site suggested occupation as far back as 1,500 BCE, consistent with the late Harappan period of the Indus Valley Civilization. A second, more controversial discovery came in 2001, when the National Institute of Ocean Technology detected large geometric structures on the floor of the Gulf of Khambhat at depths of around 30 to 40 meters. The structures covered a large area and appeared, to some researchers, to be the remains of a planned urban settlement. Wood samples from the site returned dates that some scientists placed at 7,500 to 9,000 years ago, which would make it one of the oldest submerged settlements ever found. Those dates are disputed. The methodology has been questioned. Several archaeologists have argued that the structures may be natural geological formations rather than man-made constructions. The debate is genuine and unresolved. What is not disputed is that sea levels in the Gulf of Khambhat were significantly lower thousands of years ago, and that coastal settlements from that period would now be submerged. Whether Dwarka is among them, whether the legendary city and the submerged structures are connected, remains one of the more genuinely open questions in South Asian archaeology. If this kind of history pulls at you, the places that exist somewhere between record and ruin, there's more on this channel worth staying for. Subscribing takes 1 second. Now to West Africa, and a city whose legendary status says more about the history of archaeology than it does about the city itself. Timbuktu. For centuries in European imagination, it was the ultimate symbol of a place too remote and too mythologized to be real. A city of gold at the edge of the known world, spoken of by traders and explorers but never fully verified by Western sources. When Scottish explorer Mungo Park tried to reach it in the late 18th century, he died in the attempt. When René Caillet became the first European to visit and return alive in 1828, his account was met with skepticism, partly because the city he described didn't match the golden fantasy that had accumulated around the name. Here's what Timbuktu actually was, and why its story matters. A real, thriving, intellectually extraordinary city that was dismissed as legend, largely because European scholarship wasn't looking for sophisticated African urban civilization in that part of the world. At its height in the 15th and 16th centuries, Timbuktu was a center of Islamic scholarship with a population estimated between 25,000 and 100,000 people. The University of Sankore hosted scholars from across the Islamic world. Private libraries held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, and philosophy. The city sat at the intersection of trans-Saharan trade routes and was, by any reasonable measure, one of the great intellectual cities of its era. The legend of Golden Timbuktu was real in the sense that the city's wealth was real. Gold and salt moved through it in volumes that made it one of the richest trade hubs in the medieval world. The mythology distorted the reality into fantasy, and then the fantasy made the reality seem impossible. And then when Europeans finally arrived, they found a city that had already declined from its peak and concluded the whole thing had been exaggerated. It hadn't. Timbuktu's manuscripts, hundreds of thousands of them, survive today, many housed in private family libraries, representing one of the largest collections of pre-modern African scholarship in existence. The city was real, was extraordinary, and was doubted for reasons that had nothing to do with evidence. And in the Americas. In the Amazon basin, with a city or network of cities that spent centuries as one of history's most persistent legends and then, within the last 2 decades, became something else entirely. El Dorado, the Gilded One. The legend began with Spanish conquistadors hearing accounts from indigenous peoples of a powerful chief who covered himself in gold dust and performed rituals on a sacred lake. Over time, as Spanish expeditions pushed deeper into South America and found no single golden city, the legend metastasized into something grander and more elusive, an entire kingdom of gold, somewhere in the interior, always just beyond the next river. Expeditions searching for El Dorado killed thousands of indigenous people, consumed entire fortunes, and drove explorers to madness and death. It became the definitive symbol of a legend that destroyed everyone who pursued it. And then, in the early 2000s, LiDAR laser imaging technology fired from aircraft that can map terrain beneath dense forest canopy began revealing what the Amazon actually contained. What it contained was cities, not one, dozens. Interconnected urban settlements, linked by causeways, surrounded by sophisticated agricultural earthworks, built by civilizations that were vastly larger and more organized than anyone had assumed possible in a rainforest environment. The site of Llanos de Mojos in Bolivia revealed a network of raised agricultural fields, canals, and settlement mounds covering thousands of square kilometers. In the upper Xingu region of Brazil, archaeologists identified a cluster of 20 interconnected villages arranged in a planned geometric pattern around central plazas. These weren't El Dorado. There was no single golden city. But there was something that may have given rise to the legend, a pre-Columbian Amazon that was densely populated, politically sophisticated, and capable of large-scale landscape modification. A civilization, or network of civilizations, that was largely destroyed by European-introduced diseases before it could be properly documented, and then swallowed by the regrowth of the forest it had once managed. The Amazon wasn't empty wilderness before Europeans arrived. It was a garden, a managed, inhabited, architecturally complex landscape. LiDAR is still revealing its outlines, site by site, season by season. El Dorado as myth, almost certainly false. El Dorado as a distorted memory of real Amazonian wealth and complexity. Increasingly, the evidence says yes. What these 5 cities share isn't gold or mystery or dramatic destruction, though some have all three. What they share is the experience of being disbelieved. Atlantis dismissed as allegory, dismissed as theology, Dwarka dismissed as mythology, Timbuktu dismissed as fantasy, the Amazonian cities dismissed as ecological impossibility. In every case, the dismissal said as much about the assumptions of the people doing the dismissing as it did about the evidence. Archaeology has a long history of finding things it didn't expect to find, in places it didn't think to look, because someone decided to follow a story rather than discard it. Not every legend leads to stone, but enough of them have that the ones still waiting deserve to be taken seriously. The cities we haven't found yet are not necessarily cities that never existed. They may simply be cities we haven't looked for in the right way, or haven't looked for at all. That's not a mystical idea. It's an archaeological one. And it's what makes the next excavation, the next LiDAR survey, the next careful reading of an ancient text worth watching.